All right, we're going to call the Hermiston City Council City Manager Work Session meeting to order. This evening we have a conversation about pension obligation bonds, stimulating stuff.
It is.
Super excited.
You really need to sit on the edge of your seat and get ready.
All right. So, Mr. Smith, you're going to kick that off for us?
Yeah, so I'd like to introduce to you our financial advisor, John Peterson from Piper Sandler. And he's going to kind of walk us through a presentation. You have the paper, the slides kind of on at your place as well. But this idea of pension obligation bonds will be a method for us to address our unfunded liability with PERS. And the reason we brought it to you at this point is for it to be successful, interest rates need to be in the right ratio to each other. And so I'm just going to, before I get in too deep for myself, I'm going to let John go ahead and handle that.
Welcome, Mr. Peterson. Thanks for joining us. Yeah.
Push the button down there. There you go.
Now I'm audible.
There you go.
All right, with your permission, I'll take
Please.
off my mask. Understand me. I may still speak Greek, but at least you'll be able to hear the syllables.
He just needs to talk directly into the...
Just move it closer.
Try that one. And maybe if I move it higher up the... Oh, I can tell that that's picking me up
Yeah,
better.
we got you now.
Okay, great. Pension obligation bonds have been actually a pretty frequently used tool in the state of Oregon for people to meet what they call the unfunded actuarial liability. That's the measured extent or the accounted for extent to which there's not enough money already paid in to meet the ongoing or projected obligations with respect to pensions. The state's been behind for a long time and trying to catch up for a long time. A lot of it is the fruit of, I guess you could say, kicking the can down the road sometime, way back when the state didn't want to really negotiate for higher salaries, but they were pressed on to perhaps offer something on the pension side of things, and so that was when the money match system was born. And some of the features of Tier 1 PERS became pretty unsustainable from just an economic perspective. Anyway, and that's why I don't put 30% of my earnings in toward my retirement, but somehow we've got to put about 30% of payroll towards retirement obligations. Something north of 2/3 of that is actually to fund the retirements of people who've already left the system. So really only about 1/3 of the contributions are for existing or future employees, just to kind of get a sense. But I don't want to be all doom and gloom. Let's move on to the first slide. The idea with pension obligation bonds is that you have a chance at reducing your ongoing pension costs. And the concept is that PERS has a diverse investment fund in a lot of stocks, some alternative assets, some real estate, a bunch of long-term investments that are projected to have a rate of return that is relatively high. For a long time, the assumed rate was 8%. It's been difficult to match that, I would say, over the last handful of years, at least consistently. Way back in the early days of PERS, the bulk of the investments were actually in fixed income or bond type instruments, where in fact once you were invested you knew that was what you were going to be getting. But as they needed to move into equities and other investments in order to meet their goals return-wise, then the returns became a little more volatile. But the idea here is that you have an unfunded actuarial obligation or liability of about $15 million. That is being accounted for at an assumed rate of return of 6.9%. Used to be at 8%, but now it's at 6.9%. And you can borrow, using the city's full faith and credit, you can borrow taxable bonds on the order of 3.5% right now is what we're looking at. And because you could take that 15 million and instead of making payments on it as if it were at 6.9%, you're now making payments to bondholders at 3.5%. You typically gain an immediate reduction in your annual pension contributions, and also have the benefit of actually being funded up on your liability. Please, if you have a question at any point, I'll try and see. Just raise your hand. I'll be glad to answer. But the idea is that you borrow at a low rate, place that in an investment that is making a higher return than that, and by doing that, you save money. The obvious challenge is that there's no guarantee on the return, but the rate that you're paying the bondholders, you have guaranteed. And so you've taken a variable obligation to pay for pensions in the future and taken part of that and made from it a fixed obligation of definite dollar amounts that you'd be paying over the next 20 years. Under federal tax law, the pension bonds have to be sold on a taxable basis, because essentially what you're trying to do is earn arbitrage, and the federal government will not let you earn arbitrage on tax-exempt debt. But currently rates are projected at about 3.5%, so it is a fairly low borrowing rate, certainly compared to an expected return of 6.9% in PERS. Those funds that you've gained from investors, you then place in what's called a side account, and that gets directly invested into the PERS fund. And every year, earnings and losses are credited directly to that side account. The PERS system uses a formula. They're trying to amortize that deposit you've made and essentially pay it back to the city in the form of offsetting your pension obligations over 20 years. So the monies coming in from that match the payments that you're making out on the bonds more or less. That's over a 20-year period. There have been over 150 Oregon pension obligation bonds sold, so you wouldn't be the first people trying this. Rates have been anywhere from 2.45, those would be more recent rates, to 7.06. Those were some rates in the early days. Generally, positive returns have been what's gone on, and so most, but not all of those have realized savings. I believe out of 150, there are 2 issuers that in fact have lost money. There's a couple of key factors, but the one is how much are you having to pay to investors? That's a fixed obligation. The other piece of that is how much is the PERS fund returning on that deposit that you've made into the side account. As you can see in this graph, we're in a period, actually we did see somewhat lower interest rates during the kind of the heart of the quarantine, and they came up substantially as that ended, and then have gone back down and back up a little bit, but we're kind of more or less tumbling along at relatively low rates. Here the dark line is the 30-year Treasury bond, and the lighter colored line is the 10-year Treasury bond. You can see in the inset that's the movement of those rates over the past year. If you're confused by the straight line in the middle of the graph for the dark line, that's actually a period of time in which the federal government was not borrowing with 30-year bonds. They were only selling shorter bonds than that. So that's why we're actually just drawing a straight line from the last 30-year bonds they sold to the next 30-year bonds they sold. But it's pretty consistent with the overall trend in rates over that time. Let me see. All right, this next slide has a whole lot of numbers on it. I think it's there primarily so that we have full disclosure. If your eyes can make it out, you'll see that mostly it's positive returns, but that there are a handful of years in which earnings in PERS were actually negative, and that would be the number right next to the year is the earnings, and you can see there are negative returns in 1990, slightly negative. But then 2001, 2002, more substantially negative, -7, -8 and change. And then 2008 was kind of a disastrous year for PERS. That's when the what we call the unfunded liability really swelled, because there was a 27% loss in the assets. The two entities that sold pension bonds and have not come out ahead sold their bonds in 2007. Their monies were deposited in PERS, and then the very next year, the deposit took a 27% haircut. It's very difficult when you take a 27% haircut at the beginning to make that back up. You could say, oh, well, shoot, stocks are still pretty high right now, and I wouldn't disagree with you. There may be a little bit of good news in that there have been some recent declines. Whether those represent the total declines we'll have, I don't know. The other thing from which you might draw some comfort is that, for instance, one school district that borrowed in 2008, they borrowed at 5.67%, and they're currently behind on a $40 million project. They're behind by about $2 million, which is certainly not nothing. It's meaningful money. But if they had been able to borrow at 5%, they would in fact be a little better than break even. So I think there's some encouragement that, if they had borrowed at 5%, they could have lost 27% the very next year and still caught up. But in some ways, 50-year average rates of return, I think there are a few things. I mean, they're factual, but they're pretty deceiving, because average rates of return aren't consistent. It's just kind of a mathematical average, and it shouldn't make you think, oh, 10% returns and borrowing at 3%, that sounds automatic. There's really nothing automatic there. But the most recent year returns were 20%, which is pretty considerable. In order to proceed, the state is fairly conservative, and actually these are new requirements, but they require that there be a statistically based assessment for each local government or other entity that would wish to issue pension bonds. They need to have a professional statistical assessment performed, basically using Monte Carlo and some other simulation methods to look at the likelihood of successful borrowing. The city was able to participate along with several other cities. The cost of having Echo Northwest perform that analysis is, I think, $25,000 or $30,000, but they only needed to do it once, and that could be shared. And so I think there were 6 or 7 other entities, 8 others that joined the city, and so the cost was substantially lower. But then they also have to make that report available to the general public that describes the assessment. The city did that already. The results you can see here, and actually at the time we first were talking about this, the estimated true interest cost of a borrowing for the city was at about 2.5%. Rates have come up somewhat since then. There's been some job owning from the Fed, and then obviously some very real inflation figures have come up. And so the projected rate now is at about 3.5%, but based on the Echo Northwest study, with rates at 2.5%, you had about a north of 90% probability of having economic success from issuing pension bonds. And at a somewhat higher rate of 4.5%, it was still a 73% likelihood of success. As I said, at the moment, we're projecting about 3.5%, and so that gives a probability of about 83% that the city would, in fact, save money by engaging in that activity. It's important that I think I've talked a little bit about how timing might matter. There are other risks. Early negative returns are difficult to overcome. Also, the rate credits are not 100% consistent. In other words, earnings go up, earnings go down. The system is always trying to amortize more or less smoothly your side account. And when you've created a side account, you're effectively what we would call doubling down on investment performance, because you have already the money that you've paid in over years and years and years, and you're saying, okay, we're going to put even more money into this investment in hopes of outperforming. One of the things that can surprise is that if you have particularly fast or slow growth in your payroll, PERS is using an assumption that payroll will grow at 3.4% per year, and deviation from that can actually cause a change in how the side account is amortized. But your annual payments to your bondholders, we structure those to account for the anticipated growth in payroll, but they're fixed, fixed and guaranteed. And there's even an instance where, if the side account has built some large surpluses, it's kind of the instance where in early years there's poor performance, and so there's less contributed, and then maybe you have 3 years in a row of really strong performance. You end up with some surpluses in your side account, but the rates are calculated biennially. Anyway, there can be mismatches, so it's not exactly a perfectly smooth, wow, PERS earned more, $300,000 more than what we paid on the debt service, so we should save $300,000 exactly. It's not ever going to be exactly that smooth. The economics over time do balance out, but from one year to the next, or maybe more accurately, one fiscal biennium to the next, it's not going to be perfectly predictable or smooth. And so we recommend to virtually anyone who's setting up a side account that they also, at the same time, set up some kind of a PERS reserve internally, so that if they have savings in the first few years, they're actually setting aside some of that savings in order to be able to absorb any future volatility, so that you don't have, you hate to be winning and have it create budget headaches for you. And from a purely economic standpoint, if you're borrowing at 3.5%, as long as the PERS fund is returning above 3.5%, you are saving the city money over the long run. But in any given year, that may in fact not be the case. So it's kind of important to take that into account. I think some of the same prudent practices that you might use if you didn't have a side account become more important when you do, because you're, in fact, along with the savings, inviting some added volatility into your performance. Let's see. Okay, and then we highlight in red dice risk, but there could be future changes to PERS that have negative consequences that you can't know right now. I mean, one that you could predict is actually the second bullet. We anticipate that there may be further policy moves to return what we call, or reduce what we call the assumed rate, and that's if PERS right now is assuming that they'll earn 6.9%, they map that against what they expect will be your future obligations for retirement needs. And if they decide to say, well, let's assume that the returns will only be 6%, well, then obviously there's going to be a shortfall. It's not a current dollar shortfall, it's an actuarial shortfall, but it would change the way things are calculated. And as I mentioned before, when you issue the bonds, you've changed what is a variable liability to a fixed liability to pay bondholders. So I want to emphasize that I think something I probably try to say in almost every public meeting I attend is there's no such thing as a free lunch. And here also there are risks involved. We think the Echo Northwest study validates that in terms of timing, now is a relatively prudent time to take those risks, but there are still risks. Illustrating the timing question, we have here 3 school districts issuing bonds at varying interest rates. School District A had bonds at 5.6% or higher. School District C had bonds at 5.6% or higher. And School District B in the middle had issued bonds at interest rates in the 4% range. And A and B both saved money, even though A issued at a relatively higher rate, and it has to do with the timing of that issuance. In 2002 and 3, from that point in time, performance of the PERS fund was quite strong. And we'll be able to see on the next page that even though they borrowed at a much higher rate than issuer B, their savings as a percentage of their borrowing, I know it's a lot of numbers to look at, but if you follow down from the top under School A, the next to the bottom line shows that their nominal savings were $317 million compared to a total borrowing of $490 million, and that's their savings so far. You can see is greater than 60% of the total that they've sold in bonds. Whereas School District B, borrowing at a much lower rate, issued at a less ideal timing, they're still saving money. 41 million versus 142 million borrowed is about 30%, which is still, by any measure, 30% savings is significant and meaningful, but it's nowhere near the savings that the other district had, and simply that's really a matter of luck. School District C borrowed at the same rate as School District A, and they happened to issue at the very worst time. And so they're one of the 2 that actually has economic losses. As of December of 2020, calculated at 2.6 million. And it's actually, they're anticipating additional losses. A big part of that is their side account will be fully amortized just 5 years from now. And so the amount that they still have in the side account is relatively small compared to their obligation. And even if it performs very, very well, 20% on 5 million is like earning 2% on 50 million. So it's obviously not a bulletproof solution. Although getting a low interest rate goes a long ways towards improving your odds. But if you had lucky timing, you could borrow at a high rate and still save hundreds of millions of dollars. Anyway, well, pardon me. Hermiston would not save hundreds of millions of dollars. Correct. But a school district with a $500 million unfunded actuarial liability could save hundreds of millions of dollars. Anyway, the bottom line is that if you have a side account, you'll have more volatility and less predictability in your payroll rates than if you did not. And in fact, so ER there stands for employer. The volatility doesn't really say whether you're better off or worse off, but you can have some cash flow issues if your rate credits aren't catching up to previous losses. And as I mentioned earlier, it's just a prudent practice to create some reserves in order to offset any fluctuations that might come. Next, we do have the results of the numerical analysis. And it's funny, I'm realizing I didn't really come up with a simpler graphical representation, which is bad on me. I love looking at tables of numbers, and probably not everybody does, but we'll look at it together for just a moment. We have some background data on the city. You can see on the far left we're taking data from the 2007 year, the valuation for PERS in that year. Combined payroll for the city was, for the system was 7.7 billion. And then within the state and local government rate pool, which is the pool in which the city participates, you had 4.2 some billion in payroll, and the total unfunded actuarial liability was just a little over $200 million system-wide. And so back then, the contribution rate for PERS was 11% total for Tier 1, Tier 2, and 10.5% for OPSERP. And anyway, you can see that the total net rate for employers was down in that 11 and 10% rate annually. Move ahead to the 2018 valuation, you can see payroll's gone up by 40% or so to 10.8 billion system-wide. And you have an unfunded liability of no longer 200 million, but instead 13.8 billion in the Tier 1, Tier 2 unfunded actuarial liability, and almost 2 billion in OPSERP unfunded liability. And the result that you see from that,
John,
if
you have a question?
Yes, sir.
Yes, just had a question. Just wanted to, over here, just wanted to clear up on figures. This is billion or million?
Sorry, so those numbers are in fact, they're not written in thousands, and so the combined valuation payroll
It's statewide billions.
is statewide billions.
So that's the full fund. If you go, you got to go down to the bottom line. In about halfway down is the city's unfunded
Correct.
actuarial liability.
And those numbers are not billions.
Those are just millions.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, the city's number as of the 2018 valuation was on a combined payroll of 6.7 million. You had an actuarial liability of about 15 million. The 2019 valuation, there had been some good performance in the PERS fund, and the actuarial liability dipped a little bit. Subsequent to that, the assumed rate was dropped lower, so even though the PERS fund has actually been returning reasonably well, the assumed rate caused a ballooning in the calculation of the unfunded liability, and so the city's unfunded, I'll just call it UAL, and you guys will know I'm talking about the bad news liability. Anyway, is back up over 15 million. You know, compared to 15 years ago, where you had a pension rate of around 11% of payroll, you know, these days it's more in the 30% range. And it's reducing that 30% payment is what you're trying to accomplish by funding a side account. Any questions on that slide so far? Okay, move on to the next. Here's a summary of the sensitivity analysis. They looked at historic payroll and payroll growth. Well, and we didn't come up with a good average. I'm a little frustrated actually now that I'm looking at this. But you can see that Hermiston has had a little more volatility in annual payroll compared to the system, but the system has the effect of smoothing across many jurisdictions, because there's many jurisdictions included. But system-wide, they've had an average growth in payroll of a little under 3.5%. And again, with a TIC of 3.5%, we do anticipate, compared to School District C, you'd have significantly better results, even if you happen to have invested at the same terrible time. And we have here projected rate credits. Oh, sorry, this will be the next slide over. We're using anticipated investment returns at the assumed rate of 6.9%, that there would be a deposit into a PERS side account equal to the unfunded actuarial liability of $15.4 million. The rate credit in fiscal 22, this actually assumes that we would be closing on bonds in June, and so you'd have a very small credit for the time between June 1 and June 30 of $89,000. But then annually after that, you'd have a rate credit being basically a drawdown on the side account of ranging from $1,091,000 growing over time, and then again in 2042, because we would only have a half a year there, it would be half the amount of a full previous year. And we would set debt service to grow consistent with the projected payroll growth. Sure. So in 2042, you can see that the July 1 balance is $1,007,000, and that's because the payoff is happening in the middle of the fiscal year, and so in 42 you'd only have a half a year in there. You bet. And projected, if your borrowing is at a TIC of 3.5%, you'd have annual debt service, again, escalating to match the anticipated growth in payroll in order to match the PERS projections and how they would be amortizing the side account. And on the far right, you see the projected annual savings. It's kind of growing over time and on average in the 3.4% range, adding up to a total present value savings over time of 30% of the value of the bonds. I think I said enough times earlier that we don't anticipate anything to actually be this uniform or smooth. The returns in PERS will be different than 6.9% probably almost every year, but the debt service piece will in fact be whatever we set it up to be when we sell the bonds. And so you would expect to see savings, bigger some years and smaller others, possibly some years of savings, right, where we're actually, it's not saving you money, it's actually costing you, and those would be the years where having a PERS reserve set up would allow that not to be a budgetary issue for you. Great. In order to kind of put things into perspective, we also looked at what if the bonds were sold at 3.5% in 2002, and you had the returns that happened in actuality from that time going forward. And obviously you have no change in the assumed cost of the bonds, but you have some different returns in PERS. As you can see, the savings, if you go to the far right, kind of go up and down through the years. They do generally trend up, and you end up with a total savings that is more than half the amount that you sold in bonds, which is considerable. Yeah. And then we also have the 2007 scenario. Here again, if you were selling at a TIC of 3.5%, TIC meaning the true interest cost includes the interest rate being paid to investors and the issuance costs of the bonds, the process of actually getting it sold. And there you can see that there would be some savings initially, and part of this is because even though the returns, this is calling 2023 2008, even though the returns in 2008 were a negative 27%, which hits your side account balance pretty hard, you're still getting a rate credit every year. And where that becomes a little bit of a double whammy is after a big drop, you can expect that there would be recovery in PERS, but instead of like a smart investor might do and putting more in when there's a drop, you're in fact being forced by the amortization of your side account to be pulling out even though the value of the investment is down. So it's an unfortunate negative effect that during those 23, 24, 25, 26, even though there's been a significant loss in your side account, you're actually still saving on an operational basis because you have a side account that is keeping you from being charged 6.9% on your unfunded liability. And so actually the negative impacts happen in the out years, 5 years after you've sold the bonds. There are elements in the way PERS tries to establish rates, collar the changes in rates so they can only go up so much or can only go down so much that smooth a lot of this. But as you can see, even if you sold bonds at 3.5%, in a handful of the years, if you were in the scenario that the 2007 School District C issuer was in, you'd have shortfalls 4 years in a row of $30,000 to $40,000, where in fact you'd be paying more on an annual basis than you would have paid if you had not sold pension bonds. But in the long run, if you were a 2007 issuer at a lower rate, you would end up with present value savings more than 10% of the amount of bonds that you had sold. So the savings to the city in that case would be about $1.7 million. All right. Well, maybe I should maybe ask for questions before I go to the. If you want to do this, here's how we start. Anyway, what can I do to get you in this car today?
Right. So I have a couple questions. So is there a scenario where the unfunded liability ever is paid off in full? I mean, do we get to a point at some point in the future where the unfunded portion is we're just paying for current obligations, not the unfunded part?
In theory, the moment where you have sold bonds and deposited in a side account in the amount of the unfunded liability, then your unfunded liability with respect to PERS is paid off.
Okay.
But you have now a future liability to bondholders that is
Right.
sitting there. So you're paying bondholders. There are PERS analysis is kind of depressing.
Yeah.
But the pictures go way out into the future of the unfunded liability generally just continuing to grow, and then finally, when the gloomy actuarial tables say that the Tier 1 employees are dying off faster than
Yeah.
that's when the unfunded actuarial liability actually starts to come down. And I think the projection is that somewhere in the 2040s, system-wide, we would be done with the UAL. And interestingly enough, if you sell bonds, those would mature in 2042, and so it would be about the same time that the pressure on the system is coming off. You'd be finished paying off your bonds, and in theory, saved somewhere between $1 million and $10 million over that time by having done the bonds.
So we would be making our current retirement benefit payment and our bond payment in the same same year.
Correct, and then there's one other cash flow, which is the side account that you've established is essentially offsetting your current payments.
Gotcha.
And in theory, consistently offsetting it by more than what you're paying on the bonds. And in the quasi-disastrous 2007 scenario, it's actually doing that for you for several years after you already lost money in the market, and in fact, it's saving you headache in the short run and increasing the size of your headache in the long run.
So in theory, 20 years from now, we would be even, and we would just be paying on current obligations.
That's correct.
And potentially it saves money.
I should straighten that out. Current obligation, including to people who are already retired and are collecting, right? So not just for current employees, but for current obligations. There wouldn't be an unfunded liability. I don't know, dramatic changes could happen in the way things are funded in our country. It's hard to predict. But
So the other question I had in regards to that, are we committed for 20 years? Or say some national legislation comes in or state legislation comes in and says we're going to wipe out all unfunded liability. Can we possibly go back and change this purchase? Or we're committed for 20
so
years?
the bonds that you sell typically would have a 10-year par call feature, so you'd be able to pay them off 10 years from now, if there was some change. I think the fact that there are more than 100 governmental entities in the state that have sold these bonds probably gives you some likelihood of not being left holding a bag if something comes to wipe away the liability more generally.
Gotcha. Thank you. Other questions, Council? Yes. Mr. Pruitt?
So earlier you spoke of annual payroll increase of 3 point, I think it was 4 or 5%.
Mm-hmm.
Where'd that number come from? Where does that number come from? Is that a historical average?
It's a historical average system-wide. System-wide. And the liability, I mean, interestingly enough, the annual payments that the city has to make, or the rate that you're assigned, is tied actually to system obligation rather than the city's obligation. Because you're in the state and local government retirement pool, your rate is the same as everyone else in the pool.
Okay, and then the next question I have is, are you aware of any state that currently is fully funded in their employee retirement system?
I am not.
So everybody is literally in the same boat that we're in. Everybody's still going through the same thing we are. Nobody has this figured out. This is just a shot in the dark, basically?
Yeah, well, shot in the dark would be a stretch. We're, in fact, probably about in the middle in terms of how not figured out we are. Illinois, California, New Jersey have really, really massive and horrible problems far beyond what we have. But I would say Idaho, Utah, even the state of Washington are not in as bad a shape as we are. It's, fundamentally, you've got a large obligation. It's a promise that's been made. There was an attempt several years ago to reduce, some of whether it was the cost of living increase or something else, in order to reduce the obligation to make it more manageable. Went to the Supreme Court. Granted, in Oregon, the Supreme Court is all made up of Tier 1 peers, Tier 1 PERS people. Not, you know, not that that would impact their jurisprudence,
Sure it wouldn't.
but it did not pass. The obligation has held firm. You know, some important, more recent changes, at least, you know, from an optical standpoint, is they capped the salary that could be used to calculate the PERS obligation for a retiree. So, you know, whenever Mario Cristobal reaches retirement age, if in fact he was here long enough to vest, you know, it won't be calculated on his whatever $8 million final salary, unlike Mike Bellotti. It'll be,
Right.
you know, on some more realistic number. You know, you have the example of OHSU in Portland, where you had a university with professors, but many of them are also physicians, and they're being, you know, if they're a surgeon, they're being compensated like a surgeon, but they're also in PERS, and so, you know, they retire, and their ongoing retirement benefit could be, you know, $400,000 a year. But those actually, those are the ones that make the news and look really ugly. You know, the bigger problem is all the, well, anyway, all the good, honest people who gave a lot of good years and happened to be very fortunate in the way their retirement was calculated, and so they're, you know, able to draw a generous retirement, and then people live a lot longer than they did back when those initial promises were made, and there are a lot of parts that come together into it.
Yeah, I was part of that back then, but I do recall that it was in 2006, 2005, before Madoff took all our money away. You know, Oregon was lauded as, you know, we were like we were like one of the top couple, 2 or 3
Yep.
states with our PERS system. And then the Madoff scandal took away, you know, everything that took out all the money out of that, because our investments were such that caused this problem. So it's not necessarily because the employees or the people that were retiring, we didn't cause the problem. It was the investments that caused the problem. And I just, you know, that's, to me, that's a big distinction to make.
I think it's a worthy distinction, and I can see how the way I answer that may have implied that it was about the promises made. It's about the difficulty of matching the returns on the investments with the promises made. That's
And I
really
think
where
it's very complicated. I mean, I don't think you can assign one or the other as the main problem. I mean, I think it's a very complicated system, and that's why every state in the nation is trying to make it work, because it's not a simple solution.
Jackie had her hand up too.
So when you sell the pension obligation bonds, you get a pile of money that goes into the side account. And that has money flowing 2 directions. Every year it's got the returns with the PERS fund coming into it, and coming out is the payments that are offsetting your annual pension costs.
Roy, you had a question?
I had a question on the return on the PERS side account. Where does PERS invest those monies in order to get that return?
Sure. I don't have the actual slide of it. You can actually go to the PERS website and find it, but it's a mix of, they have some handful of fixed income investments, but it's mostly in long-term and relatively illiquid investments. They do have a large chunk in the stock market. They have alternative investment funds. They have real estate approached a handful of different ways. Anyway, it's a mix of investments, and I think again in 2006 Oregon was being praised for their management of the whole thing, and we haven't done quite as well as Yale over the years since then.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions at this point? Okay, so you were going to get to the if scenario.
Yes, if the city wanted to proceed, we would look at, this is kind of a standard standardized timeline. The city is not part of a school district pool, and so it's not as complicated to pull together, and it's possible that we could move more quickly or more slowly. We in fact could tailor the timeline somewhat to the city's needs. Although there are some advantages to closing in advance of the end of the fiscal year in terms of kind of neatness in how it functions. But by the end of this month, to notify us and the city's bond counsel is a firm called Mercer & Shannon in Portland, in order to get a resolution pulled together and authorize the action. And by middle of March, we actually send to PERS a request. We'd like to pay off the UAL, and they'll do an updated calculation of what the liability is, and then in that period of time, you'd be issuing both adopting the resolution in council, issuing the public report so that people would review it. We'd be putting together a preliminary official statement, which we've done a handful of those in recent years, but it's a description of all the material information about the city and its finances that an investor might think would be important in deciding whether or not to invest, together with getting a rating from a rating agency, and then we would take a close look. We could probably sooner than April 25th be doing the due diligence. And again, the May 9th and May 23rd, those are just example dates. That will be the timing for the school district pool. So we could be ahead of that, behind that, 1 day or 2 days in either direction. It's really kind of depends on what best suits the city. And again, closing, send the funds to PERS, and then effective July 1st, the payroll rates would be reduced by the anticipated contribution from the side account.
So we don't actually lock a rate until the bonds sell.
Correct.
Right? And the Feds have promised several interest rate changes in the next 6 months.
Correct.
So potentially the 3.5 that it is currently could be significantly higher.
It could be 20%, theoretically. I think we would recommend that the city think about having a threshold rate above which you don't want to sell bonds.
That's what I was just going to mention, that if the council is comfortable doing this, I'm not comfortable unless you tell me if the rate's above X, we don't do the deal. And right now, and this is subject to further conversations with Mr. Peterson, I would say that number's 4% or higher as the total all-in cost. If it's higher than that, I don't think we should do it. My personal opinion is we won't issue at 3.5. I think it'll be something less than that. And we've seen at 3.5, we save money. And if it's a little less, we save a little more. But that's my own personal view of the information.
Why would you say you think it's going to be less than 3.5?
I'm sorry?
Why did you say you think it will be less than 3.5?
Well, just
Eternal
like we
optimism.
do in our budgets, we tend to underestimate revenue and overestimate expenses. When we say the cost is 3.5, that's the analysis basis. That's in effect their best guess plus a little cushion, if I'm being true.
Well,
I think when we get to the point of pricing and knowing what the cost is, it'll be something less than 3.5, but there is still the chance it's higher.
Well, I want to caveat the heck out of that.
Please.
I will say that when we held the seminar in December, it was actually closer to 2.5%, and so a 3.5% had a considerable cushion in it. 3.5% today has a lot less cushion in it than I would like, and the key, as you're mentioning, the Fed is kind of signaling rate increases. Those, to the extent the market finds that credible, a lot of that gets priced in immediately. Where it may actually help is we're talking about selling bonds that mature over 20 years, and they're not maturing level. In other words, not level debt service, and so the average life of the bonds is probably 15 years or so. And to the extent that the markets trust that the Fed's action will actually tame long-term inflation, we could actually see the result being that the interest rates beyond 10 years would be a little bit lower as a result of the Fed increasing rates on the short end. And so it could be a neutral impact. It could be even a better than neutral impact, simply because most of the debt service you don't have very much of your principal in the very earliest part of that maturity schedule.
Okay, thank you. So we got a couple more minutes. Any other questions? So, Byron, do we have action on something tonight on this?
Yes, so I had placed into an item that to discuss this further and telling us to move forward and to start this calendar, because in my opinion, the sooner we start the process, if that's where we're going to go, the better, just because of the things you brought up related to the Fed and interest rates. And as we get to the beginning of this agenda, I was going to ask the council move that item up because Mr. Peterson is going to be going over to the school district to do a similar presentation and talk with them about pension obligation bonds. And so they want him there as soon as possible. So if we could have that discussion maybe when it's fresh in the mind, early in the agenda, maybe after the consent, and then kind of decide that. But if the council's not ready, you know, this is a complicated issue. And so if you're not ready to make a decision tonight, we can bring this back, and I'd like to have a decision at the next meeting or something where we know whether we keep going down this road or not. That's what we're looking for from a staff perspective.
Perfect. Well, I think we can talk about it when we get to that point, but when we open up the city council meeting, we talk about moving it up too. So, Mr. Peterson, you're going to stick around for that conversation?
Well, the city is, I'm your advisor and you're my customer. And one of my colleagues covers the school district.
Oh, okay.
And they said they would prefer to have a representative in person tonight. And since I was over here already, she recruited me, and I was, you know, glad to do it. But my first priority is here. But of course, they're expecting to turn the agenda to my presentation whenever I get there, and
Okay.
and so, you know, 7:30, 7:45, you know, probably even 8 o'clock is fine. But I
Okay,
just
perfect.
you know, want to do.
Good. That
The
gives
later
some
I
time.
start, the later I finish too.
All right, any other further questions? All right, we're going to close the work session, and we're going to start our regular city council meeting in, how much time do you guys need? 2 minutes? Yeah, 2 minutes. All right, we're going to call the regular Hermiston City Council and Urban Renewal Agency to order with a declaration of a quorum. We have 2 members that are absent this evening. We're going to excuse Mr. Davis and Mr. Ron. Please join me in the flag salute. Welcome this evening. If you're just now joining us, we had a work session prior to our regular city council meeting to discuss pension obligation bonds. Ms. Smith, any changes on here other than the one you had talked about during the work session?
Yeah, I have no others besides moving up 11A potentially to
Okay.
9.
Okay. Is the council okay moving up 11A to 9.5? You okay with that? Okay, so we will move discussion and possible action on pension obligation bonds up to 9.5. Sorry to our friends at HES and UEC, that'll get pushed behind that. All right, so we have a presentation tonight from the Hermiston School District. Mr. Usher, is that you? Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be here this evening. I know, I think it's been probably 6 months since I've been in here to visit with you guys. But tonight is Educator of the Year night at the school board meeting, and actually I just finished watching the start of those presentations going on right now. So Dr. Mooney couldn't be here and Mr. Bacon couldn't be here because of the Educator of the Year presentations tonight. But again, appreciate the opportunity to be here, provide a little update of what's going on. Construction is going well. We are still on track to open the 2 new elementary schools in the fall. We've been getting asked the questions, I don't know if the city is as well, if we got a deep discount on like ugly greenish blue paint that we got to remind people is weather barrier, and we didn't get a great discount along with the city of Hermiston on their new building as well. But things are going really, really well. We are still set to break ground on the high school annex this summer. Which I'm really excited about because that's going to provide us the opportunity to get some utilities, hopefully, to our Weber Field project that's been going on as well. Not that I'm not excited about the high school annex and all the new classrooms, but we're going to get to do a little bit more work over on Weber Field and continue the improvements over there that I know our baseball community is very excited about, and so am I. Also at tonight's board meeting, along with recognizing Educator of the Year, they're approving next year's calendar. So that is on the agenda tonight as well. So people can start planning their vacations when their kids are going to be out of school. Hopefully after tonight, we'll know exactly when those are going to be. I think there is going to be some kind of adjustments to next year's calendar as well, a little bit around Christmas break than what we've seen just because the days fall at an odd time. I think everybody's heard, obviously, the mask guidance is going to change. March 31st is the date for the Hermiston School District. So speaking of school calendars, that'll put us right after spring break is when we will be looking at changing our guidance in the district according to what Oregon Department of Education, Oregon Health Authority, and the state has provided for us. I think a lot of questions have been coming into the district of what's our stance going to be, because it is going to be the option of the district as to whether they're going to require masks, and our district is going to be masks optional. We are not going to require them for students following that. There are a lot of other guidelines that are going with it. I think, I think we feel like it was a real win for our school district. It was probably a little closer to a tie than it was a win right now, because we're going to be rolling back some other guidance to go along with it, but at least we get to see smiling faces of our kids every day when they walk into classrooms, and that's something we're really excited about. I've been really busy with athletics. It is winter postseason right now. We're getting ready to start spring sports, but we just finished hosting back-to-back wrestling tournaments at the high school. We had the Mid-Columbia Conference 3A championships last Saturday. I'm still trying to recover from just 3 days ago on the 12th, where we had the WIAA Region 4 championships. We had 18 high schools, 224 wrestlers. We fared really, really well on the boys' side. We're taking 11 boys back to state, so I'm excited that we're getting our wrestling program back to where it was years ago, and we are determined to get back to winning state championships again soon, which I know the WIAA feared when we were coming in to begin with. Boys and girls basketball as well. It's district tournament time, and our girls won a big playoff game on Friday night. And boys went and lost at Meade in a close game, so boys and girls will both be home tomorrow night at 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the second round of the district tournament, which is new for people in Hermiston. People are still asking me all the time, what's going on? Why do we have so many playoff games? Well, if we recall in the OSAA, you play basically 15 weeks of a regular season, and you play one game to go to the playoffs. Well, our girls could end up and boys could end up playing 5 or 6 playoff games and then follow that with a regional tournament game before they actually go to state. So we've got a lot of playoff basketball to go, we are hoping. Dance team, still up and running. They're still our defending state champions because we didn't have a state championship last year for dance. So we're excited about that as well. They go to districts in 2 weeks, and then late in March will be the state championships again in Yakima for dance. We are hopeful and expecting to win at least one state championship with our dance team coming up. Don't tell them I said that. We'll put a lot of pressure on them, but they are doing very, very well. I got an opportunity to see a couple of their performances, and it is impressive. The amount of work that they put in is unbelievable, and it parallels to any program we have in our school, including our wrestlers and our football program. Our dancers practice every morning at 5 a.m. They're in the gym for 2.5 hours. They have often Saturday marathon practices, sometimes from 9 to 5 on Saturdays, with parents coming in and cooking meals for them during half-hour breaks. So they put in a lot of time and deserve what they've accomplished. We just finished swim district tournament. Our swimmers, and again, playoffs are different. Our district swim tournament was in Longview, Kelso, and our boys did really well. We had several boys PR make it to the finals. Unfortunately, none advanced to state, but we're really excited. That program is continuing to build. And we sent our very first girls bowler to the WIAA state tournament this year. We were very excited about that as well. I think she finished 53rd out of like 118 bowlers at the 3A level. We're really excited that we got an opportunity to send our very first girls bowler, and hopefully many more to come. I think we had 5 freshmen on our girls bowling team this year, so pretty exciting stuff for us. That's about all I got. Any questions for me?
So Saturday was wrestling?
Yes, this last Saturday was wrestling along with 108 AAU basketball
That
teams.
was my
Yes,
next
Mr.
question.
Drossman.
So, busy weekend. I don't know if anybody noticed. Try to go out to a restaurant or drive up and down 395 on Friday or Saturday or Sunday. It was busy.
We figure we probably had about 8,000 visitors in town on Saturday,
Awesome.
and then probably 5 to 8 on Sunday for AAU basketball.
Well, we appreciate the school district's willingness and the partnering organizations that help to host and sponsor those events to bring visitors to Hermiston. It really is our tourism industry, frankly. They help keep our restaurants full and keep our hotel rooms full, and so we appreciate the school district's willingness to partner with those organizations to allow that to happen, and our taxpayers to continue to fund amazing facilities that allow it to happen, because we've got some of the best gyms in the state, probably in the Northwest. So thanks to the school district for their support of that.
You're welcome. You know, in that regional tournament for wrestling, we actually had to kind of fight to get it here. I volunteered our school district to host, and our region actually consisted of the Mid-Columbia Conference and the Greater Spokane League and the KingCo Conference, which is Bellevue, Issaquah, Kirkland, Redmond area of the East Seattle area. So once we found out they were in our region, we definitely wanted to show them the community of Hermiston and let them see our facilities. Had a great conversation with several of their head wrestling coaches, and they were so impressed with not only our beautiful buildings, but also how great we keep our athletic facilities. And they said over there, a little over half, yeah. January 21st was the semester break, I believe, yeah.
Right on. So, but you did hear from ODE that school districts for sure are going to follow the same guidelines that the governor suggested by March 31st?
Yes, March 31st is our date. I know that the state of Oregon said that before March 31st could be the general public and businesses, et cetera, but March 31st is our date. I think they set March 31st obviously to coincide with dates of state government, but at the same time, that's when most Oregon kids will be coming back to school from spring break, but we will be just getting ready to go to spring break the week after that. So we'll be looking at April 11th, I think, is our first day back. to see smiling faces in our classrooms. That's what we're hoping. I mean, we all know that usually this is fluid. We say that for 2.5 years now, or 2 years, but that's what we're looking forward to, yes.
And so kids will still have options. Want to wear a mask, you wear a mask. You still attend online?
Yeah, we
Homeschool?
still have Hermiston online as an option for people if they want to do
Okay,
that, yes.
So there's still options out there to the community too, so.
Correct.
How about other questions from the council? Always great to hear from our friends at the school district. It's good to see you again,
Yep.
Mr. Usher.
Thank you guys very much. Appreciate
you.
it.
All right, we're going to move on to citizen input on non-agenda items. So if there are citizens that are here that would like to speak to items that are not on our current agenda, please come up to the microphone up front, introduce yourself by name and address. Try to direct your comments to me and limit your time to less than 5 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you, Jackie Linton, Hermiston, Oregon. I want to bring up about the internet service that we talked about, you all talked about probably a month ago, I think, and having internet service for the county, because some of the county is having problems, the people that live out in the county not getting good service, and I feel that Hermiston should not be involved as trying to do a business, raising, I think it was $4 million, and to help with that. I'm for the infrastructure part for the city, because that's needed, but people that live in the county, you should direct that with the county, because Hermiston property tax money is for Hermiston. I feel that's how it should be used, and I'm pretty sure a lot of Hermiston people will feel that way as well. You choose to live out in the county, which is great. It's beautiful out there. I have a brother that lives out there. Very nice. But you need to talk to your internet service. Get together and say and demand that they give better quality for the amount of money that they're charging for that. So I just wanted to go on record to say that I'm not for, at this time, money being used to make sure that internet service are in our parks at this time. Maybe down the road, because I'm one of those that believe when you have in debt, pay some of that stuff off, and then if you have extra money down the road, if you decide to want to do that, then that's good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. And just for clarification purposes, I'm not aware that the city has made any sort of commitment to improve internet service to county. And I think we had some conversations about partnerships, and one of those partners may have been the Umatilla County, but I don't know that we've ever had any conversations about taxpayer dollars going towards county services.
No, we've focused on trying to put some infrastructure within the city, but the county has facilities here. That was where we mentioned partnering with them, is they have facilities here, and there's potential that
If
they
want
might
to partner with us,
be a
then
partner
maybe.
in that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Sure. We would ask the county to pay their fair share. Well, we'd pay our share.
We'd pay our fair share.
Yeah, but we wouldn't pay any of the city share to help that. Just for clarification. All right, any others? I saw a lady over here that raised her hand. Welcome.
Hi.
Go ahead and pull that microphone down so we can hear you. There you go.
Yeah, thank you. My name's Karen Dela Cruz, and I live at 1205 West Highland Avenue at Highland Manor Apartments. My husband and I live, I've got to go by my paper, and I wanted to mention to you folks, look at me, I'm your grandma. I could be your great-grandma almost. And so just to let you know, I'm just an everyday lady. You guys got brains. You've got things you're talking about. I have no clue, but I've got something to share with you, and I'll try to do it in 5 minutes, to share something from my heart. I want you to remember me. To remember my curly hair, I remember a 72-year-old, almost 73-year-old lady who's had 2 kids, and I've been married 42 years. And we've been in Hermiston 42 years. And so Okay, we'll find my spot. My husband would be here, but he is recovering from going deaf recently and had a stroke and leukemia last year. He's doing really good, though, but he's a mess. We live in affordable apartments. That's not affordable housing for low income. It's just affordable for us who are above the low income. And I have papers. I'm to speak to the chairman. Yeah, right, okay. I just remember that on the paper. Here's some copies of the letter we received a month ago. I'd just like you to take them home. What I'd like you to do with them is think about them being handed to your sons, your daughter, your grandma, your mom. People of all ages live there. And there isn't much you're going to be able to do to fix what's going on right now. But I'm hoping that you and I can learn something, to do something about what I'm seeing going on. We're being displaced, whether we pay our rent or not. Almost everybody pays their rent on time. There's 2, I guess, that don't. But there's just working young men and women and babies and older folks and us retired who work. My husband worked full-time his whole life. Tillamook cheese, remember when you buy it. Remember, he's being displaced. Remember, what else was it? And at Hill Meat, he worked there for years. So remember when you buy Hill Meat sausage. Remember the 46 families, please. So I want you to remember also the 46 people, not just me. But what happened was people were outside the day we all got the papers on our door. There's people coming out crying. There's people coming out saying, oh my God, what are we going to do? Where are we going to go? It was such a shock. And we go, okay, this is okay. We'll survive. I mean, it's life. You know, people buy places, and you gotta, accept that. And that's okay. Everybody buys. If we're free to buy and sell. I'm not knocking the selling of it at all. And I'm trying to get to the part that I am really disturbed about. This part here. Okay. I started noticing something, because we were managers, my husband and I, for years at a townhouse apartments for 15 years. And before that, we rented, we know Mike Jewett. He's wonderful. He was honest, and high integrity and humane. Cindy, the manager of the apartments we're in now, is like that too. They're humane and they have integrity. And there's just a warmth that comes with the way they function with their apartment people. And then things changed at Townhouse too, and it got sold, and the rent got bumped up and stuff, and we just took off. We'd been managing for 15 years, and we just went to Tri-Cities to figure out what we were going to do. And they weren't all run out. They were given options. It was, different owners, and I'm not knocking either owners. I'm just trying to show you something that I'm seeing that I don't know what any of us can do. What I'm seeing is, all I can see is, we've got the low income that need help, and they're government subsidized, and they need help, and they need affordable housing. And I know that. That's true. We're not them. All of the people in the apartment complex, maybe one, because I'm not sure, because I'm not the manager, but one or two maybe have been getting help, but the rest are just working young guys with their new wives or girlfriends, and they're making babies. And they're all going home to grandma, they're going home to their parents, they're going home to their grandmas, because there is no place to rent.
Karen?
Yes?
Right here. You're at 5 minutes.
Okay.
So make it quick.
I will.
Please wrap
Okay.
it up.
Okay, and I'll just read then. That'll help a lot. Okay, so it's low income. Then I see this middle, I don't know what you call it, but there's a name for it. Just low middle income that they're not millionaires, that kind of stuff, but they're just working like us. We just barely made it, and we were fine. We raised 2 kids. One's got a business here, all that kind of stuff. So, but the ones that are getting displaced, and are those the ones that have worked hard in Hermiston? Some of them all their lives. They're being displaced. We do not know where we're going. We'll probably have to move in with our daughter and store everything again. But it's that middle that I'm worried about, that I wonder what's happening to the working class. Because they all work, but man, the wealthier up here, or my daughter's making really good money, but we're down here having worked these years, just getting along, buying everything that we need. But I've seen them being booted out. Okay, so what I see is, for the particular place that I'm at, some people I've heard they're going to be moved in. That's fine. Everybody needs a home. And then there's just like this, they're coming in, and we're all going out. We can't even come back, but that's okay that this is happening. But what I'm asking you, and then bump it up higher, how can it's happening more than just our place. People are buying up the older places, and I think you know all that already. They're buying them up, bumping them up, or chasing them all out, and there's no place to go much, except back home to mama and back to grandma, and or homeless. And so that's something to think about. We just need a safe place to land, and maybe until we can all figure out how to get housing, that's not low income, but it's just income of people who pay their rent and can pay $800 to $900 to whatever. It's whatever. Don't pull them out anymore. If you can stop others from doing it anymore for a while. But I don't know that you legally can. You guys know the laws. I don't know them at all. But I do know humanity and how to treat people, and this isn't a way to do it. I'll read this. Can I just read it? What can you do as a city council? What are your plans to stop this? Remember the old lady and other 46 families. By growing, I'm going to read this, I just scribbled it on, faster, let's see. Do you have any plans to stop this? Hermiston is considered the fastest growing town in the Northeast. Big companies come in and they need housing, and I guess they're having trouble too finding housing. I don't want to just read it all.
Karen, I think we have your point.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for putting
I appreciate it.
your heartfelt ideas together on paper. I wish you and I hope your husband's health gets better and you guys can figure something out.
We'll be fine.
I appreciate your time and sharing your story with us this evening.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
And I think you'll also be pleased to understand that we hear your pleas. We understand your concerns. The City Council just had a work session recently to try and figure out housing and try and find additional resources for housing. And we specifically identified that middle housing, that affordable housing group as we have a desert out here of housing for that group of folks, and trying to identify more builders that will get more affordable workforce housing that you had identified. So it is a priority for us. We appreciate your comments this evening. Others that would like to speak this evening, come on up.
My name is Monica Jones, and I live in Hermiston. I don't really have anything particularly to say. What I'm looking for is some clarification regarding the water and sewer closure on Main Street.
Okay. And so I think you're talking about behind City Hall?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why is it closed down?
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
So we're replacing the water line that runs in the alley between 2nd and 3rd Street.
But because why?
Because it's old and it would need to be replaced at some near point in the future, and we were already tearing up a lot of the area and decided to save some money and try to replace it now while the alley was open.
Was it closed down a year ago for 4 days to deal with that issue?
The other side, it was, there was a portion of it closed. The sewer line last summer was replaced.
Okay, So how big is the water and sewer closure affecting the businesses that are there?
We've been in communication with as many of them as we can.
How many? How big is it?
There's probably 8 businesses in that block.
When were they notified?
They've been notified all along. They were notified last fall before it happened. They were notified during the week last week. The contractor's been handling those notifications, so I don't know exactly when they
The contractor didn't do a
happened.
very good job, from what I've heard.
Okay.
So, in regards to that, when you talk about our local businesses and wanting to support them, we now have businesses, 8 businesses there that can't work for 2 weeks, including restaurants. I believe there's 3 of them.
I think they're being provided services, though. Is that accurate?
Yeah,
No.
so they may have a day or 2 of being down, but all during that time, we are providing temporary water service to all the restaurants in the block.
So they're able to.
And as well as there's a spa business that also relies on having water,
Right.
and
Well, my
so
friend's a massage therapist there, and she's not able to work these next 2 weeks. In her office on the corner.
Well,
of
we're
Second.
also, in addition to providing those 4 businesses with temporary water, there are temporary toilets that are out there. They're heated, they're cleaned every day, that are provided for all the businesses while the water service is not on.
Well, I just want to say, I was a bit concerned when I heard today, she's like, basically, I'm going to work from home with anybody that I can, when they call, if they're within close to me. And it just doesn't sound like the businesses were, it didn't sound like, she said she only found out from a fellow business person, not from, nobody contacted her directly.
Well,
There was a
I
notice on
know
the door.
they try, but I know businesses often have different hours, so maybe they weren't able to contact her directly.
She's there from 9 to 7, Monday through Friday. I mean, it just didn't sound, and she made a comment that one of the restaurant owners told her that he wasn't working, he bought food for the week. So like I said, that's why I was asking for clarification. It doesn't sound like the contractors did a very good job about lining this up ahead of time for our local businesses. And I think that reflects poorly on our city. Regardless if it's the contractors, that's still, you know how it is. When there's a problem, it's the top of the chain that is ultimately responsible, so.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys.
Yep. Others that would like to speak this evening? Okay. We're going to move on to the consent agenda. There's items A through C. Any of those the council wants to pull? Seeing none. Any public comment on consent agenda items A through C? I don't see any. Can I get a motion to accept consent agenda items A through C?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved by Councilor Primer, seconded by Councilor Barone, that we accept the consent agenda items as presented, A through C. Roll call.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously, 6-0. We're going to move up our previous discussion that we had about a possible action on pension obligation bonds to this point in the agenda. Mr. Smith?
Yes, so like I stated before, I wanted to bring this to a possible discussion and action because of the timing. And really the way I take 3 things out of John's presentation earlier. First, it has a strong possibility of helping us reduce our costs in the long term. It also has risks that are related to it. It is not a sure thing. And then the last thing is what I mentioned again, timing. If we were to do it at a bad interest rate relationship, depending on when it happened versus when the rates were bad or when the returns were bad from the PERS system. And so, just trying to get some feedback from the council if you wanted to chew on it for another couple of weeks, or if we were given direction, we could move forward and get the process started so that we could potentially have the bonds sold before the end of the fiscal year.
So I have a couple questions, Mr. Smith. Of the 150 Oregon POBs that have already gone through this process, how many of those are cities? Do you know that, Mr. Peterson? Okay. But there are some cities, and probably the major, larger cities. Okay. And then this group that we partnered with to help fund this study, who were the partners, the 8 partners? Was it all Northwest or Northeast folks?
No. Mr. Kay, do you know the list of those? I don't remember.
I don't have the list, but there's a couple of cities, the Hermiston School District, and I can't remember.
I think
all
the
of them.
city of Lebanon was
Yes,
one of the
Lebanon
cities.
was one of them.
And then I don't remember the other, but it was.
There's some other cities that are
Yes.
considering this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Smith will probably remember this conversation, but you and I had this conversation probably 2 years ago,
Yes.
that this is something that we should do to help reduce our unfunded, our UAL, actual liability. And if we could do the taxpayer some good in the process by reducing the cost of this, potentially millions of dollars,
Correct.
I think it only makes sense. So I know I don't get a vote on it, but my opinion would be to move forward. Others got comments, questions? Mr. Smith? Yes, Mr. Brown?
I guess one question and probably a proposal. This bond would be 22 years. Is that correct?
Is that what it officially would be, John? 20?
20.
I thought there was an extra 2 for some. Okay.
20 years, okay.
Okay.
And I guess the other proposal would be, just much as Mr. Kay said, maybe as a council having a cap of this percentage so we feel more comfortable. If we do want to move forward, we at least have some room that we've already agreed upon, whether to proceed or not. And
If I could interject just a moment, what we're asking for is, do we keep going? We're not actually saying we're going to issue bonds. All I think we're asking, and City Manager Smith can correct me, we'd like to start the process. We can stop it at any time if anything moves against us. The actual date you make a decision is the day you say you're going to sell the bonds. Up to that point, you're not committed to anything. I want to make that clear to the council, and I again would second, let's put a cap on it, and if it goes above that and we're getting close to that, we know we're going to walk away from it, because I won't put the city at risk like that. I won't, not on my watch.
When you say there won't be any costs, or there won't be any liability, there
won't
will be
any
some costs to go
liability
down
with
this
a debt
path.
service payment.
What's that?
There won't be any liability for a debt service payment for pay back the bonds.
Right.
We will incur some costs in the process of getting to that point.
Right.
But they will be de minimis compared to the benefit that we'd receive if we're to believe the analysis, and I do.
Okay. Yes.
If we can set a cap, and if we can pull out at any time that we feel that it's not advantageous to us, then I think that we should go forward.
agreed.
Any questions?
Well, I guess I have a whole lot of questions, which is why I wouldn't, I mean, it was an hour presentation, but it was still something that we hadn't been really presented any information on till we had that presentation tonight. So I'm not comfortable making a decision to move forward without at least getting more questions. I don't exactly know what our structure is right now for how we're paying PERS. Are we making monthly payments into PERS? Does that money get invested in the pool? Can we invest more money into that PERS pool on our own?
We can't. We pay our PERS rates based on our payroll. So if our payroll is $1 million, and if the rate's 30%, we pay 30% of $1 million. We pay it monthly as part of our payroll process, but that's how we pay it currently. And we can't choose to invest more unless we establish a side account through a process.
And the only way to establish that is through this bonding process
No, we could take a bunch of money from savings and put it in a side account.
Okay, so I mean theoretically then we've got money that we've invested in other accounts. We could take that and put it into this PERS account for future investment and start earning that and not have to pay the interest rate.
Right, but once it's in the side account, we never get it back. We don't get to use it on any other projects, no other
We
things.
don't get this, I mean, we're gonna have to pay this obligation, and you
Right.
don't get it back.
Right. Our current projections are that the debt service would be lower than our current PERS contributions annually. And so, like Mr. Peterson suggested, we would take, my plan is we would freeze what we're paying into PERS and then start saving money for when the down years, when the returns don't hit where they're paying for everything, and we have the money set aside. And still, in the long term, once we get to a certain point, we begin to save on our annual contributions.
If we just invested in this side account, I mean, can we be saving money without having to be paying this other interest rate that we're gonna have to pay? I mean,
Sure, but I mean, I can't imagine that we have $2 million. We probably have $2 million maybe we could find. And that's not going to hit the unfunded liability at the level of borrowing for the $15 million.
You know, I kind of look at it like we all, or a lot of us, have owned a house or own a house, and we borrowed, well, I'll just give you my perfect example. I borrowed at a really bad time, and it was 7.5%. And fortunately, over time, interest rates came down, and I was able to refinance that debt. So I was able to go out, resell, go buy, get another loan, buy down my current debt, and save the percentage that I would have paid over the next 20 years or 30 years, whatever the loan term was, and not necessarily pocket that savings, but save myself in debt payment over the next 20 years. So that's kind of what this is about. We're committed to that 15 million, whatever it is.
if we can make prepayments on our own without borrowing that money, I mean,
But we're committed at 10% on annual.
7%, 6.9. Every year.
Somewhere in
That's factored into every rate increase. And
Okay.
the idea is, instead of the 6.9%, to be paying that at 3.5.
That's the current rate. That's not the previous rate, right?
Right, I mean, that's what we're
All
paying.
of our previous debt, those tier one persons that have retired and is part of our debt, that's at a higher rate, right?
Well,
Yeah. It's complicated.
I mean, in
So
past,
it's higher than,
in past
3.5.
years,
Yeah.
that assumed rate was at 8, correct, John? And
Yeah.
so that's what was factored into our costs.
and that ebbs and flows based on the market returns and all that sort of stuff. So it came down recently a couple times, but does it go up? Right.
I guess to that point, I do like that there is a diverse portfolio with the PERS. One of the things, even though we could continue to pay this debt over like on a monthly basis, eventually it's going to take a bigger chunk out of our general fund, which is going to, I guess, have the city have less flexibility with what it's able to do. For instance, if something were to break, pipe were to break, sewage were to break, it'd be much more costly, and we wouldn't really have the liquidity on the front end. Now, I'm not sure exactly where those funds would come from, but, you know, taking the funds that we have right now that we have saved for other projects would probably be a really difficult move to make as well. Either way, this is a very difficult move to make. The mayor 2 years ago, I think, had a roundtable with community members, with leaders in the community to try to address this problem, because this is only going to get bigger. And so I believe that this move would be the right one. It's going to be a hard one, but I think it's in the right it's in the right move. And we've, as a council, historically have talked about this for a while. So I think now's the time to make some action, especially when the rates are where they're at right now. We should capitalize.
Yep, shoot.
So by doing this, by moving forward with this, this would basically set the amount that we pay every month, as opposed to it being possibly a variable amount that could increase or could decrease, but more than likely increase. Is that correct?
It won't totally set our rates, because there's still going to be some factoring in of who's in our pool, how many employees we have, all those types of things. But it will stabilize it in that it won't have the same pressure from that 7% assumed rate of return and that $15 million that's not been paid. That $15 million is part of what pushes our rates up on it regularly. So taking that out of it takes that pressure out of the rates. They're still going to move because, you know, we have different employees and different people are retired and all of that. But it takes the $15 million pressure of the unfunded because we funded it. Now we just know we have to pay the 3.5% of interest and the principal back.
So I guess what I'm hearing from the administration, they just want some consensus, or does it need to be a consensus or approval?
I think we'd like to have a motion.
Okay, I'd like a motion to, if you guys think that this is a good idea, to move forward, to continue to have this conversation. We're not obligated at this point to commit, but is this something that we're interested in and we want to move forward with the conversation?
I move that we move forward and continue on with this process.
I second it.
Okay. How about public comment? Yeah, come on up.
Jackie Lynch in Hermiston. I just want clarification. You're talking about retirement fund for city employees, teachers, no, just city employees for the Umatilla County? No? Hermiston? Just Hermiston. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Hold on just a second. Hold on. Let me see if there's any other citizen input. Okay. You had another question?
No, I just think we should take some time to chew on this. We'll come back next meeting and make a decision whether to move forward.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. So, looking for a roll call.
Yes.
No. Yes.
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 Motion passes unanimously.
No.
Or not unanimously, 5-1. Good thing I got my council president correct. And Mr. Smith, if there are counselors that have questions about current obligations, how we fund those, how we pay those, how this would impact that, do you have time, or does Mr. K have time to sit down and
Yeah,
go over that
absolutely,
stuff?
we can do that. And we can bring back that type of information with the official resolution that would need to be kind of the next step to talk a little bit more about how it works now and how it might work in the future.
Good. And, you know, it might be nice to see some current cities that are doing this and having some success.
Yeah,
with
we
it.
can find out who has also done this.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Peterson, for your presentation this evening and joining us. Okay, now we're going to move on, or back, I guess, forward to 10A under ordinances and resolutions, Resolution 2208, HES UEC Customer Allocation Agreement. Mr. Smith.
Yes, so I'll ask Mr. Rivera to address this.
Welcome, Mr. Rivera.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. Tonight, I also have with me a guest, Robert Eckenrode, who is the General Manager and CEO of Umatilla Electric Cooperative.
Welcome, Mr. Eckenrode.
So tonight, we're talking about Resolution 2208. This is allowing a customer allocation agreement between the city and Umatilla Electric Cooperative and authorizing myself to sign on behalf of the city. So to give you some context of where the tax lot that we're discussing tonight is located, you can see up here a map. Does this have a pointer there? So here is the Hermiston Airport. This is Walmart Distribution Center, 395 heading north. This is our industrial property, the Cook property. The areas located in teal is UEC's defined service territory. The areas located in light red is Pacific Core service territory. And the area located in yellow-green is Hermiston Energy Services territory. The tax lot we're talking about tonight is tax lot number 600 on the map number 4N2824-00-00600. It's the white box in your map, and as you can see designated with the red line, that is the delineation between Hermiston Energy Services and Umatilla Electric Services defined service territory. So this is a closer look at that tax lot, which is broken up. 78.1 acres in UEC, 21.9 acres in UEC's, in HES's service territory. And possible proposed industrial complex is defined here, placed on the map where it's anticipated to be located if constructed. As you can see, the majority of the proposed structure is in UEC's service territory. So UEC requested Hermiston Energy Services to consider a service territory transfer for a member inquiring about a possible service. Because of the tax lot straddle two defined service territory boundaries as defined by the PUC, HES enlisted Stoll Reeves to review and provide guidance. They're experts in PUC service territory issues within the state of Oregon and have a deep understanding and background with issues like these that arise. So it was determined, as you saw on the maps, that most of the identified tax lot is within UEC service territory. The majority of the facility buildings would be located in their service territory. And the PUC would likely consider the facility a unified load, which means operations typically are integrated, and so it's not feasible for two utilities to try to serve that load. So what we were informed is regardless of action taken by HES, under PUC's previous rulings, UEC would most likely be allowed to serve the member based on the above provisions in the law. So once we understood that it was clear and defined by the PUC that if this UEC member would move forward and construct this facility, UEC would be viewed as most likely the entity that would be entitled to provide service anyway, and that helped us understand the next path that HES would take. And so after reviewing all our options, HES proposed and UEC supported a customer allocation agreement instead of a service territory transfer. HES had a little bit of concerns with kind of opening up the unintended consequences of opening our service territory. We felt like a customer allocation agreement could meet everybody's needs. That would eliminate that. HES would retain its service territory entirely. Only the customer would be allocated in this location on this specific tax lot. We also felt that a voluntarily negotiated customer allocation agreement would be a more streamlined approach with a faster conclusion with the PUC. This ties directly into Council Goal 5 that you've set before us, which is foster community partnerships to address local and regional issues. It also has a key tie into economic development, which has always been a priority for Council. So with that in mind and the work we did, we have a resolution in front of you, and staff's recommendation is to approve.
So, Mr. Rivera, I was trying to look at my map, and so I may have missed some of your presentation.
Okay.
So what does customer allocation agreement necessarily mean between HES and UEC? What sort of legal parameters? We're not giving up property, we're not giving up territory. It's just an agreement that they can serve this member on our property, so to speak.
So to speak, correct, Mr. Mayor, we went through the process and verified, just for our understanding, even if UEC's member has some portion of its complex on HES service territory, UEC would still retain the right to serve that person. This streamlines it for everybody, makes it clear for anybody who comes after us that we are giving permission willingly and going into negotiations, going in front of the PUC to say, yes, we understand there's a customer that splits our boundaries, and we are comfortable with Umatilla Electric serving that load, even though a portion of it is located within our defined service territory.
So it kind of protects the city, but also any future owner, if HES were to sell, for instance, to another entity. This customer would still be protected. The UEC's agreement would still be protected to whoever we sold it to.
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. I think the easier way for me to look at it is it provides certainty for everybody, no matter who's sitting in my chair and no matter who's sitting in your chairs. It provides certainty for the customer to construct, the member to construct the facility. It provides certainty for Umatilla Electric to serve that member, knowing that it wouldn't be contested in future, and it provides certainty for the city of Hermiston because it helps streamline a process for industrial growth and hopefully potentially additional jobs, housing, et cetera.
Gotcha. Yes, Ms. Myers.
So part of the provision is we have in the language of the resolution and also in the language of the agreement that will be presented to the PUC, there's provisions that outlines that process. So if the customer wholeheartedly and entirely stops existing, then it would revert back to Hermiston Energy Services. But there is provisions that actually walks through, and it's part of your packet that lays out the agreement in there.
What if this customer wants to expand on property that is only served by HES in a neighboring property?
Any discussions or decisions would come back before the council for direction and approval, and it would go through chain of command similar to like this has.
Gotcha. Other questions by the council?
How much energy would this customer be projected to be using?
That I have no idea. We just know the facility and how the PUC would rule based on the facility complex and the size of the service territory, so I don't have an anticipation of that.
So you don't know what the dollar value that Umatilla or Hermiston Electric would be giving up potentially?
We wouldn't be giving up anything. That's what we did through Stoll Reeves to investigate if we would have any right to the service of that customer, and because we wouldn't, based on previous rulings of the PUC, even if they do construct, we would have had no right to that load. And so HES is not foregoing any revenue.
Okay, any other questions by the council? Thank you, Mr. Rivera. How about public comment? Any public comment on possible, let's see, on the resolution 2208? Okay, seeing none, can I get a motion to adopt resolution 2208 and lay it upon the record?
So moved.
Second. Been moved by Councilor Spicer-Coon, second by Councilor Primer, that we approve as presented resolution 2208. Roll call.
Yes.
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 Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Thank you, Mr. Eckenrode, for your partnership in working with the city to try and resolve this. We appreciate that partnership very much. All right, so moving on to committee reports. Any committee reports this evening? Anyone? Okay.
I attended the Stepping Stones Alliance meeting on January 26th. Some things that happened at that meeting that probably need to be brought up. They have the daytime warming shelter that they've been running. Over the winter, they had to close that down starting February 1st, so that's no longer open. The building that they were doing it in is going to be renovated, so it can no longer be available to them to have the daytime warming shelter. They have started doing a weekly meal service at Desert Rose Ministries every Wednesday at 12, which is something that they've been working on for the homeless and for the people that can come attend that. They're still making plans and trying to move forward with finding a shelter for the homeless. At this point, they're a little stalled in the process because they don't have any final approval as to where the shelter is going to be located. So they're having some issues on exactly how they're moving forward, but they're still looking at the type of shelters and buildings and the services that are going to be provided along with that. And there's another meeting coming up tomorrow night to discuss how else they're going to proceed. Another thing that they are really looking forward or for is what kind of commitment they're going to get from local agencies and the city and the county as far as assistance with this shelter.
Well, I saw the House Bill 4123 passed out of committee to the floor and then got moved to Ways and Means. So it's a good
Right,
process.
it's at Ways and Means, which is a good sign.
Yeah, so hopefully it gets funded by Ways and Means, and that's the bill that included City of Hermiston and the West Umatilla County group that's working on the homeless project, and the pilot project that was going to fund, I think, $1 million. So that would be awesome if that happened through this session. So good positive signs going forward with that. So hopefully that helps out with Stepping Stones conversation. Other committee reports? Yes, perfect. Thank you.
The faith-based met this last time.
Okay.
And the National Faith and the Blue Weekend is scheduled at EOTech on the weekend.
I'm sorry, Counselor, what are you talking about?
The second, huh?
I can't hear you. What's coming up? You want to put your microphone like closer?
All right, I'll get it a little closer.
Thank you.
The National Faith and Blue Weekend is scheduled October 7th through the 10th, and that's events is scheduled to help nurture the relationship between the faith community and the law enforcement personnel. And also, we're inviting other communities around to celebrate this weekend with us, and so.
That's an event being hosted here in Hermiston?
Yes.
Where at?
EOTech.
EOTech, all right.
EOTech. Okay, October 7th through the 10th. Also, one other note, they've also scheduled I Love My City May 21st and 22nd, and then a service that Sunday also. Also, we discussed a little bit about the Community Action Board. That's kind of not a whole lot of things are happening here. That's where you juveniles are cited as first offense, and but I guess there's some things that have to be worked out with the county on that as far as. But anyhow, and also the churches are looking to be part of this utility assistance fund for our citizens, and that's about it. We also had a report from Campus Life, who's still ongoing, and of course have been working through their challenges that they have at this point too. So yeah, cool. That's what it's all about.
Mr. Smith, we had some funds identified for financial assistance on utilities, and I think we had reached out to the faith-based advisory group as well as through them potentially to the churches to help facilitate that.
Right, and I know there is kind of a subcommittee of the faith-based advisory committee that's working on a proposal, and I'm waiting for them to get back to me on that so I can we can bring that forward to the
good
council.
relationship, I think. And the I Love My City event, is that in partnership with Parks and Rec? Yes.
Yes.
So we will be having an event as well during that time period? A recycling event? Okay.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's something we've had in the past, but.
Yeah.
But, nice if we could have another one.
I agree.
If not that weekend, at least sometime in this, for spring cleaning, I think,
We can
for our community.
work on some sort of.
We'll look
community.
into that.
Okay, perfect. Other committee reports? Nothing? So, mayor's report, just want to remind everybody about the LOC Spring Conference that's coming up here pretty soon. If you haven't registered yet, please get with Lily and have her get you registered. It would look really bad if the city of Hermiston did not have great representation at its own conference. So I would encourage you all to be there. In fact, you may be enlisted in helping support stuff while you're there too. So being tour guides and recommendations and maybe even speaking. So maybe some opportunities for that sort of stuff. Also, elections are coming up. And you have to have your information in by March 8th. So if you plan on running for an election, you do have to have your application in with Lily, city recorder. What's that? By 5 p.m. on March 8th. All council positions or all ward positions have at least one, except for Ward 4.
3.
Councilor Myers' ward, right? Are you Ward 3?
That's correct.
Okay, so we're still looking for a representative from Ward 3, so if there are members of the community that are interested, we need representatives, not just for Ward 3. If you want to apply for one of the other wards, please do so. And I believe the judge is up as well.
That's correct.
So March 8th is the deadline for those. We have our first League of Cities board meeting coming up this Friday. And it's in person in Hillsborough. Super excited. First one in 2 years. Yeah, that we've had in person. They've all been.
It was
electronic.
February of 2020.
Yeah, so super excited to see everybody again and get back together. Other council reports? Nobody? Okay, Ms. Smith.
One additional date to put on your calendar, Friday, March 4th, 12:15 p.m. is the Hermiston Industrial Park ribbon cutting. And we'll be releasing information to the press and putting it out on our social media feeds, inviting all those who've participated at various levels of government, as well as all the business owners and property owners in the area to participate in that ribbon cutting. Again, to try to do what we talked about in our goal setting and celebrate some of the good things that we've been working on.
March 4th, 12:15, and somewhere up there.
It'll be on the cul-de-sac is when we're targeting.
So have you guys driven that street yet?
Yeah, if you haven't been out there, there's 10th Street, and there's a cul-de-sac that goes
Dead ends to
dead
nowhere.
ends out towards
DuPont Pioneer.
DuPont Pioneer Seed.
So if you're going south on Ship, it's to the right.
Yep.
Okay, so probably in the cul-de-sac somewhere.
Yes, in the
12:15,
cul-de-sac.
Friday the 4th. Perfect. Anything else?
That's it.
You have some students tomorrow.
Oh yeah, we're continuing our partnership. The partnership agreement is really with the University of Oregon, but because they don't have an engineering program, a civil engineering program there, they also work with Portland State, and so some engineering students from there are going to follow up on some of the planning work we did on the kind of the areas surrounding the old Toyota dealership area, trying to generate ideas, things that we could do to make some improvements there. And this is more from a traffic standpoint. That's what the engineers are going to look at. How could we improve traffic circulation? And it really extends to both sides of the highway in there to just see if there's some things that we could do that might make some improvements. So they'll be here at noon. Actually, they're going to be here more than that, but at noon we're going to do some meetings with our engineers. The mayor is going to be there.
So this is kind of a long-standing commitment from the University of
It's a
Oregon.
year. It's a year. They call it the Sustainable City Year program, and so we did some classes in the fall, mostly planning. We did also some public finance, and then this one, and then the library is also working on a survey. They'll have some students in town later this week as well, doing some different meeting with some different groups to get feedback on sharing information. How does this community share information? So
Yeah, it's a great partnership between City of Hermiston and University of Oregon, and gives students an opportunity to see municipal government firsthand and participate in some meaningful projects, and we get some free resources out of it, but also they get to, share in some experiences that are relevant to their education process. So, and we've worked with them in the past on some other projects. They had an intern.
Oh yeah, that's the RARE program.
RARE project.
Right. That's
So-
a different program, but yes,
But that was through the University of Oregon too, right?
Do they sponsor that, Mark? Yeah. Yes, they
Yeah,
do.
the University of Oregon's got a lot going on, doesn't it?
Watch it.
Quack, quack.
Be careful.
All right. Anything else, Mr. Smith?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so we are going to recess for executive session. City of Council and the City of Hermiston will now meet in executive session in the Conference Center Rotary Room for the purpose of discussing matters pertaining to negotiating real property transaction. The executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602E, which allows the council to meet in executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the council to negotiate real property transactions. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are excluded. Representatives of news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No final decision may be made in executive session. At the end of the executive session, the council will return to open session, which the audience may attend. The executive session will last approximately 20 minutes.
don't turn it on half the time.
All right, we're going to reconvene the Hermiston City Council meeting. And anything else, Ms. Smith, for the good of the order?